The first episode of the Owl House drops. I watch it, and feel the creative spark, the instinct that told me that I was watching something special. And the episodes that followed showed the bountiful heart the show had. But I was baffled. Why is no one talking about this? No, I know some people are emphatically talking about Owl House, but why isn't it spreading like wildfire? The show's great! Or is it? Just like in the show, it's difficult to put all my gay feelings into words. I listed out the pros and cons, and the list, unfortunately, ended up being lopsided. The show's story has had termites in the walls for the whole season, but you only noticed it if you paid attention. Let's go over Season 1, shall we? What the show has is an abundance of heart. This show is gay in all meanings of the word. Happy, lame, homosexual, and overall, it's pretty great for it. The main characters and their positivity are the standout quality of the show. They're also kind and considerate. Every time a character's in a conflict, it's always followed by concern from another character. Whenever a character accidentally hurts one of their friends, it's almost instantly realized and attempted to make right. Because all the characters are just that self-aware and value each other that much. It's the self-awareness that makes all the kindness and positivity feel actually sincere, and thus hit home. It's way more common to do some Care Bear shit and have everyone just spout empty platitudes about being loving. It's another thing to actually just have the characters doing that.
Deal?
Let's go. Too tight!
Every episode feels like you just spent time with some really cool and kind people, and you just come out of every episode feeling really nice. And obviously, this intense focus on the characters' well-being can only come from one place: the creators. I feel like it's a rarity to have characters be so tangibly near and dear to the creators. It's palpable, the feeling of authorial hands doting over their own characters. They really took Bill and Ted's wise words to heart.
Be excellent to each other.
And speaking of characters, let's talk about the best one! Ida! Wow, I got like 3 paragraphs in before my analysis just devolved into wife rambling. Aw, whatever! Anyway, I love Ida so much!
Guys really have the hots for you.
Yep.
It's fitting that a core conflict of the entire first season is that everyone wants Ida, and will start killing people if they lose her. I think the moment I fell in love with her, for sure, was a single goofy throwaway gag that likely not many people even paid attention to. Early on in the series, Ida and mainstay mascot character King, also known as Alex Hirsch as a cat, make an absurd bet. King's demands for winning are that Ida has to wear a dunce hat, sleep in a shed, and never enter her home, the Owl House, again. Later on in the episode, she, for the first time ever, loses a bet. This is the point where every character that loses a ridiculous bet contests it, denies it, demands a recount. But not Ida. She puts on that dunce cap and sits in a shed because she promised her dear friend she would. She's self-sacrificing and loyal to her loved ones, going all the way back to her high school years. She's extremely capable, she's got a sense of humor. As a wanted fugitive, she doesn't pay her taxes, so she's got a lot of gold stored up. She knows a bunch of weird magic shit. If you're considerate to her, she'll be considerate back. Really, it's no question that she's best girl.
I hate everything you're saying right now.
It's hard to imagine the Owl House without her. If only the writers didn't agree with me. Now, what are the other positives? The animation is nice, especially when they Sakuga it up for the bigger set pieces. Oh, the protagonist Luce is canonically bisexual with a lesbian crushing on her. That's nice. Anyway, music and sound is fine, I suppose. Wait, what? You want me to elaborate? Oh right, for Western kids animation, this is groundbreaking. This is way more blunt than usual. They didn't just pussyfoot around and keep the gays in the background, or put their gays at the end of a season or the series, where no one would notice. I call that latter one the end gays. We're in the end gays now. You see, this is groundbreaking because Luce blushes at boys and blushed at a girl once in one episode, and Amity, the gay prep bitch witch, blushes a lot around Luce and even wrote her name on a confession letter. Sure, that's gay, but I don't know. just technically being gay via light hints and confirmation via the creator outside of the original source material isn't that impressive to me. You have to go gayer. Make this relationship have more emotional and narrative impact. Be a satisfying relationship in its own right, instead of cheering just because it exists. That's why I'm not a crazy fan of the ship.
Don't you dare insult shipping in my presence.
Don't get me wrong, I'm glad it's in canon, and the show's better for it. But I'm a lifelong Yuri aficionado. As of now, these two don't even break into my top 20 ships. Now, as a weirdo that kinda likes romance and non-romance focused works, let me explain. The best ships should be a symptom of a well-written character dynamic, that the characters have nuanced and impactful connections to each other. In simpler terms, have chemistry. You don't even have to like icky romance to like good chemistry. It just makes scenes where certain characters are together fun to watch. The Amity and Luce relationship doesn't have too much of that vital chemistry. It's really just a one-sided crush right now. It's sweet, but shallow. Luce, despite being a massive modern nerd that cares about fanfics and shipping, doesn't notice the oceans of sploosh whenever Amity looks at her. Luce just thinks of Amity as part of the gang. And Amity doesn't really have too much of an explanation for why she likes Luce beyond the shallow stuff. Like Amity finding Luce generally attractive and pleasant, and she's fearless. You could think the biggest allure is that Luce has inspired Amity to be a better person, but I'd rather just have that be shown to us, as opposed to having to theorize about it. That's what good relationships are based off of: appreciation and understanding. Hopefully next season Amity starts to understand and put into action her feelings for Luce more. But I'm not sure it can do that. Get any gayer, I mean, with the rich overlord elephant in the room. Disney's pro-LGBT in countries where it's very safe to do so, but we all know how much Disney likes China money. And China doesn't like them gays, among other groups of people.
Yeah, and what's wrong with homosexuality anyways?
Nothing, unless you want to make money in China.
You see corporations censor gayness outside of America all the time. It's the reason why even though most media in the US is super pro-queer, we have to settle for background gays or end gays in kids animation. It's the only way you can sneak them in and still get those international bucks. As it is now, you could still probably edit out the gay in the L House. They're not holding hands, making out, or even saying they love each other out loud. So you could just brush off the blushes as nothing, and edit the name on her confession letter to, I don't know, Gus or something. There are articles lauding Luce as bi, but I don't think Karens, nor non-native English-speaking parents, read online American articles about shows their kids watch. While they could have handled the gayness much worse, I do think this is as far as you can take plausibly deniable gays in today's international markets. Amity's feelings are not explicit and central enough to the story to where you couldn't just edit around this homolust. Speaking of the little gay, let's talk Amity. I am actually fairly impressed with how much and how quickly her character arc progressed. All of her character development episodes are rather close together, and it does feel like a rarity for such a transformation to occur so thoroughly and quickly. After the library episode, her bully persona basically dissipates entirely. Now she's a rich, awkward gay who's part of the gang, but I guess is still willing to be abusive to people outside of the group.
Watch it, nitwit. Oh, hi, Luce. And Co.
Baby steps. Old habits die hard, I suppose. But it's all good. The fact that her redemption isn't instantaneous and accepted is a good thing, because that means there's more for her to work towards. A reason I appreciate this so much is that she's basically the character of Pacifica from Gravity Falls, but the writers paid attention to Amity and made an active effort to develop her, unlike Pacifica. Like, Pacifica is another rich bitch, prep bully girl, but is static in that role much longer than Amity. Pacifica does eventually get an episode exploring who she is as a person, and it's revealed that she's so far up in her rich bitch ivory tower that she doesn't even know what sharing is.
You do know what sharing is, right?
Sharing?
But it's implied that she's not a lost cause, and has a newfound respect for her rival Mabel. But then the show forgets about her for a while, and the rivalry with Mabel. But when the show remembers Pacifica exists, she gets a backstory episode with Dipper. You know, the character she barely, if at all, interacted with, and not the show-long rival she softened up to. Guess Dipper needed more girls to be shipped with. Jeez, can you imagine Amity getting no development episodes, having the episode Understanding Willow come out, and Amity shares her deepest, darkest secrets with Gus, and not Luce? Ugh. Also, what little development Pacifica got was forgotten in the series finale. Great. So thanks, Owl House, for writing a much better Pacifica. Okay, that's pretty much all the positives. Now it's just the negatives. How long is this video? Oh god, no. I swear I like this show. You have to believe me!
What are you? The fun police?
Yes! And you're coming with me.
Before I get into the juicy, thick bits, I'll talk about some reasons why I don't think the series is spreading. I think the series has an advertising problem. Not necessarily the promotional side of things, but just what sets Owl House apart from other shows? When I thought about the show's pitch, it came out like this. It's a story about a girl ending up in another magical world. There are witches and magic in it. She learns magic at a wizarding school with other young adults. It's just an isekai. On top of that, it's the most generic, trapped in another world story. It's Harry Potter. That's it. No twists, no frills. It's somewhat of an abstract problem, but lacking a unique pitch does hurt word of mouth. Think about it. Star Wars is about space samurai with laser swords. Rick and Morty is an irreverent, nihilistic take on Doc Brown and Marty. Naruto is about ninjas. Gravity Falls is Twin Peaks for kids. Cobra Kai is about the washed-up life of the high school bully in the 80s sports movie. So on and so forth. It's not an ironclad theory of mine, but I would say Owl House has the same problem as Farscape. What is Farscape, you ask? Way to prove my point. It's a really good character-driven sci-fi show, but it doesn't have any unique gimmick. No laser swords, no twist on an existing property or premise. There are bioships, but who cares? That's just the thing they drive around space with. It's harder to recommend something without the show itself making it easier to do so via a compelling elevator pitch. What doesn't help a lack of a unique, marketable identity is the fact the world of Owl House is rather uninspired. For a story set in a fantasy world, it sure barely feels like it. At the start of the series, Ida is selling strange human oddities which she doesn't fully understand. Luce does, and turns on a portable TV. The people of this world are then amazed at the concept of a TV. Literally a crowd of people holding fistfuls of money at Ida because of how amazing and magical the concept of a TV is, to this world full of magic. But then the writers just change their mind, because as the series goes on, they show that the world of Owl House has TV in it, in this Middle Ages looking fantasy world. Hey, so we're having Gus's dad do a news broadcast, right? Yes. News broadcast. Here. In their world. Yes. Well, okay, you're a professionally paid writer after all. Anyway, what's recording him? A camera. Isn't it weird if there's just a dead-ass TV camera in our low-tech fantasy world? Oh, I guess. Huh. Just put an eyeball on it and add some fleshy bits. Now it's a magic camera. Fuck it, whatever, that's good enough. Let's just move on. I would guess this happens because the writers literally can't imagine a world without these convenient devices for comfort and exposition purposes. Like, seriously, you rely on TV news exposition so much, you retroactively make episode 1 really stupid.
I'll pay 40 snails for the screaming box!
I'll give you 100! Can I eat the tiny person inside?
I love you. There you are. Oh, hi. I didn't see you there.
To join a coven, Edalyn Clawthorne's body shall be petrified in stone.
Wait, sorry. Upon rewatching, there is one neat example of unique magical technology. It's in the episode Hootie's Moving Hassle. Generic bully Basha is using a sort of literal raven phone to seemingly talk to her mom. but the raven then springs to life and flies off. Okay, that's kinda new and magical. It's essentially an audio version of carrier pigeons, but instead of a letter, it's storing an audio message and sending it away. It's neat. It's like their world approached the same problem of long-distance communication, but because they had magic, they solved it in a completely different way. Yeah, it's great, flavorful technology. Good work. But, oh, at the end of the episode, she just pulls out her smartphone scroll and uses Instagram.
Penstagram!
Why? God damn it, why? What was the point of the Raven phone? That has to be some sort of speedrun record of not giving a shit and self-sabotaging your own setting. The magic anachronisms don't stop there. If they've got smartphones and Instagram, they should have magic internet too. Magic Reddit, anyone? They've got video chats. They've got roller coasters. They don't just have TV, they have TV culture and broadcast etiquette. Did I mention they have fucking Instagram?
Penstagram!
All these modern day conveniences that took millions of years of technological innovation and specific circumstance just exists in the Owl House, with a slight magic theme. It's so lazy. I'm not saying they have to be in a Stone Age, but you have a world that literally has magic in it. And the best way you can think of for people to communicate or have fun is just the same technology we already have? The writers invalidated their own world building within an episode because they're so clueless about world building that they don't even know when they did something right. I doubt they realized they had immediately ruined their accidental good job. It's like button mashing in a fighting game. You might do some things right, unintentionally, but you ultimately have no idea what you're doing, right or wrong. So you can't consistently replicate or understand any good you do. What makes this extra absurd is that they have the perfect way to solve this entire issue, via covens. You have tons of covens, tons of people dedicating their whole lives to specific magic focuses, and you see none of that in the world. These people allegedly go on to use their specific magic and jobs in the real world, which is neat and exactly what I'm asking for. But for whatever reason, in actuality, magic jobs are all self-contained to just the one episode. You never see an adult on the streets with a magic-based occupation. Not a single construction coven worker is seen, despite super strength being one of the most useful things you could have for construction. The school gets wrecked at one point, which would have been the perfect time to have some background construction coven folk, but it just gets repaired off-screen. There are pest control folk and monster hunters, but none of them are from the Beastkeeping Coven. All of this is baffling, because the entire point of their public education is to learn magic, and magic schools have been pumping out magically adept students for decades at this point. Instead, it seems the world of the Owl House is actually just inhabited by medieval monster peasants, or background gag monsters, who don't use any magic. In the Owl House, there are two incompatible settings pretending to be one. There's one world of magic schools and lifelong covens, and then there's the world outside school, a goofy fantasy setting where the only witch in the world is Ida. If the writers did their jobs building their setting right, we shouldn't only remember covens exist when Luce is at school. You should have seen witches doing magical work all the time since the start of the show. But ultimately, covens only exist when the writers remember them. Imagine, though, if magic was much more present in the setting, that there was an attempt to make the setting cohesive, like familiars, ghosts bent to people's wills, and magical goo slaves are extremely common. Why don't they carry messages instead of smartphones? There's an episode where we visit a carnival, but it's pretty much the same as the ones we have here, except they pun swap the names of everything. Okay, instead of directly translating identical carnivals from our world to theirs, again, you could use covens. A bunch of coven people can man entertainment stalls. You can literally fly on griffins in this world. Who cares about roller coasters? Bam, that's a chance to show off the Beastkeeping Coven. Wanna duke it out with your friends without hurting them? Bam, abomination fighting games. If the Plant Coven joins in, you can have literal Plants vs. Zombies. And don't get me started on what pervy shit you could do with the Illusionist Coven. That's some holodeck VR give up on life shit. There's a potion making coven, bard coven, scrying coven. The possibilities are endless. This would both build the world and also inform the audience about what the covens are and do. You know, make the world feel alive and lived in. Lived in by magic people. Not by people from our world retrofitting magic to be exactly like stuff we already have. You have so much magic you introduce in the show, but none of it affects their technology or day-to-day life? That's like the first question you ask when you introduce magic in a setting. How does this affect the world? Magic, by nature, is capable of infinite wonders. It can do anything you can dream of. But the Owl House writers don't dream at all. And it's boring. It's clear the writers aren't even trying. Now, the Owl House isn't bad because of its unimaginative setting. It's just that by having such a boring world, it's ignoring a key strength of the genre. Good world building wows and excites. Being sucked into another world is a huge appeal of fantasy stories. It's your foot in the door with the fantasy-loving audiences. It'll really stick with huge nerds who will constantly discuss random world-building details and implications. It tickles their gooey imagination holes. Even the audiences that don't think or care about that stuff are implicitly benefiting from the more immersive and thoughtful experience. The inverse is also true, where if your world-building sucks, people won't know what's wrong, but they can still feel something's off, and they'll be less engaged. Let's look at Harry Potter. Harry Potter wouldn't be a breakout sensation if the wizarding world was the same as ours, but they use wands instead of guns. The world of Harry Potter actively tried to make a distinction between the mundane and the mystical. You know, to sell that Harry's entering another world, make the world of Harry Potter exciting and new. It's no coincidence Harry leaves a shitty normal life to the wondrous strange world of Hogwarts. I have a lot of problems with Harry Potter, but they at least tried really hard to make this magical world magical. Hell, look at our world! How you can have completely different cultures from one US state to another, or how different neighboring European countries are. This is like having Spain be identical to France, or having California be identical to Arizona. It removes any sense of wonder this world has if it's functionally just our world, except there will be a magic creature or guy just hanging out somewhere. This has devalued this whole new world. It's really just a magic theme park, rather than another world. Like, in the scenario where Luce is trapped in this world, the only thing Luce misses out on from the human world is just hanging out with her mom, because this world has all the conveniences she's used to. It's not an isekai, it's a same-sekai. Or a homo-sekai? Actually, yeah, it's a homo-sekai. Like, in the eventuality that Amity goes to her girlfriend's world, she won't even be remotely impressed. She would just think our world is a more boring version of hers, with a boring twist on all the technologies she's used to. So, as a more recent and useful example of powerful world building helping a show, look at Steven Universe. Everyone's favorite. The world building of Steven Universe was probably the only reason it lasted so long. People put up with Cookie Cat and random town civilians slapping their bellies because the world of the gems was so unique and fascinating. It was a tantalizing mystery to have Steven wander into a random gem installation and try to figure out what it was there for, to figure out how the gems influenced our world, and what their world was like. It was also fascinating to learn about the gems themselves. If Lapis, some rando gem lady, can control the entire ocean, what could actually important gems do? Gems are eternal beings. They could have seen suns spawn and die in their lifetimes. And fusions are so cool! What do fusions look like? What powers do they have? How good is the relationship between the two gems? Will they be a cleaner fusion like Garnet, or be a horrible monstrosity? The fan art, the fan fiction was endless, because the world building was a wonderful, engaging playground for the imagination. In less flowery terms, 6 seasons in a movie. Steven Universe got that before Community. And most of it was filler and not even related to any gem stuff. That's just how powerful good world building can be. The Owl House doesn't have a fraction of that intrigue. It doesn't have nearly as interesting a world. So it has to rely purely on its story and characters. And well... When you look at the Owl House, you kinda immediately know who this is made to appeal to. Teenage nerd girls! Look at all these cute characters being cute together, gee whiz, ain't that precious.
Teen Girl Squad! Cheerleader! So-and-so! What's your face? The ugly one!
And you know what? That's fine. There's nothing wrong with having a target audience. But you've limited the people that can enjoy your work to just that group. It's niche. Which, again, is fine, but you can make it to be so much more. You can elevate your work and expand your audience with good writing. Story is king. And said king is universally beloved. Like, seriously, who's like, ew, the story in this is too compelling. Your target audience will take something they initially liked just on the premise or subject matter to something they can now love wholeheartedly. And people who wouldn't typically care for the subject matter can love it as well. Getting the writing down is a win-win from not just an artistic point of view, but a utilitarian one as well. My friend didn't give a shit about the Karate Kid or martial arts, but he fell in love with Cobra Kai because it was written so damn well. And people who were fans of the Karate Kid are ecstatic with the show. On the flip side, I like this weird Japanese kids show called Kamen Rider, but the story's usually crap. So no one outside of weird nerds like it. It's strange, it's niche, and oh god, it's so lonely being a fan of this shit. So, the reason you don't hear much about the Owl House is because it only kinda satiates people outside of teen nerd girls. It's time to talk story. There's a moment when Luce and King are writing partners, and there's a short gag where they reference the classic story structure book Save the Cat. If you've watched a lot of pretentious film video essays, it's probably one of the books that gets referenced all the time. That and Story by Robert McKee. In retrospect, maybe they shouldn't have referenced Save the Cat, because after the season is said and done, it kinda explains a lot. I'm a big story structure guy. Though, don't get me wrong, if you can be engaging and unconventional with your storytelling, good on you. But that should generally be left for those who have mastered it. And the writing team's grasp on the story structure for the Owl House is far from tight. It's in fact rather loose. So, I didn't talk much about Luce in the positive section, but it's not because I dislike her or anything. I think if she were a real person, she'd be pretty cool to be friends with. However, as a character, she does her job as protagonist really poorly, and that's because of the bias of the writers. You see, Luce is extremely well adjusted, she has a healthy, positive mindset about everything, and is more mature than most adults out in the world right now. Yes, the world is that depressing. My problem with Luce is that she's a little too healthy and wise to function as a protagonist. She's so kind and considerate that she immediately apologizes and tries to make amends if she's clearly hurting someone or doing something wrong.
We should follow her to Amity's house to show off our conjuring. That'll show her who's got no talent. Actually, I'm starting to think we should head back. I know Amity can be kind of cold, but no one deserves this. These are private thoughts.
But that's not how the plot sees it. They write the plots like she's some sort of young rapscallion, like Timmy Turner or Danny Phantom. Those two have to learn a lesson because they're so immature and irresponsible. Which Luce isn't. The writers want you to like her, and dumb impulsive protagonists can be real irritating. That's probably because she's Dana Terrace's second self-insert, but that's besides the point. Save the Cat, at its core, isn't anything new. It's really just the hero's journey, but in a much more digestible package. The core of the hero's journey is that a flawed character grows and learns by going through the struggles of the events of the story. The journey. So, Timmy Turner makes irresponsible wishes to learn to be responsible, and Danny learns stuff like not to cheat or else he'll become Ghost Satan. The Owl House goes through the motion of the archetypical hero's journey, but Luce really doesn't need to. She's a pretty good person without much to improve on. What you have with Luce is the hero learning their lesson 1 second into the journey happening, or being massively misunderstood and unfairly punished so she can be shoehorned into the hero's journey. Luce gets in trouble for touching a crystal ball for literal seconds, and then she gets detention for an entire year for touching something in an open locker. You really could just blink and miss the catastrophic event that catapults Luce into a year of detention. Might as well just expel her at that point. For most of the show, Luce doesn't grow or change much, so there's no point to the journey. You don't feel any sense of progress of her in the Save the Cat shell, and she's the central character of the show. There's no emotional weight to most episodes that star her. You're just stuck sitting there, watching the show go through the motions. The wrong motions. It's like you're in narrative detention.
We need emotional content.
And that's why, looking back, I forgot this season was 19 episodes. That's a lot of TV! Most of it starred the poorly conceived adventures of Luce, and therefore was totally forgettable. Save the Cat is neat and all, but it's just a tool. If your character's greatest strength is their morality and kindness, you need to make the story work with that. In Aang's, and say Charlie from Hazbin Hotel's case, they're good people in a shitty world. Their antagonists aren't just a single villain, but the world itself. Contrast is a great way to show off the value and strength of characters, by testing them. Though, rewriting the tone of the whole world's kinda a tall order, so you could just give her a real character flaw for her to work on? A character arc? No, growing just purely in power doesn't count as an arc. That reminds me, I gotta talk about Luce and her spells. Learning spells or fighting techniques or whatever are the easiest, most memorable narrative milestones in fantasy stories. Not too dissimilar from making mental milestones out of how many survivors there are in horror movies. You don't just learn a cool new move, you don't just learn more about the world. You do all that, and it's a huge moment of character growth. As a writer, it can be difficult to know where to properly place information in your story. That's why spells are great, because the audience is paying more attention out of excitement for the new shiny spell. It's the easiest slam dunk in the world for a writer to hammer in the character's struggles or signify that the character is progressing. So, how does the Owl House handle spells? Well, Luce starts off the show super excited to learn about magic, just like the audience. But she never pursues it or practices it much in the entire first half of the season. She learns the light spell in episode 4 and doesn't even bother to learn any more spells until episode 12. 12! She just flat out lost interest. That's understandable. I wouldn't want to learn how to transcend my human limitations with magic spells taught to me by a magic goddess either. Yeah, totally. Anyway, for the rest of the season, she learns the rest of her spells in seconds, like actual seconds, to no fanfare. But you just... They refused! They just refused! They refused to make Luce interesting! They have 19 episodes, so many obvious shots with spells to give this girl something! More layers! An arc maybe? No, she's just a nice girl that likes to hang out with friends, no story here. Let's focus entire episodes on shrinking jokes and a walking house. So funny. Like, Luce just sees an enchanted sports ball for a moment and is like, oh, I guess I just know how to cast Paaaacccciiiinnnngggg now. Like, what? A few seconds is a bit quick to learn a spell that can easily murder people. This should be huge. Luce learned an explicit combat spell as opposed to the more lighthearted stuff she learned up to that point. Like, she can really hurt people now, and that should be really meaningful to someone as kind-hearted as Luce. Like how Aang was traumatized by accidentally burning Katara with firebending. But the show doesn't care about the significance of Luce having such a dangerous power that she could easily hurt others or even herself with. Because it isn't important.
I told you we shouldn't mess around with this! Look what you did! You burned my sister!
Fire magic! Amity!
We just want Luce to know how to cast fire. Let's just get it out of the way. Nope, no potential stories or growth here. Luce is already perfect. Let's just move on. The problem isn't that the Owl House is an avatar. The problem is that the Owl House isn't anything. They weren't willing to take risks with Luce. In the face of such a clear moment of intrigue, one of many, they chose for her to be static, to never change. The whole season, Luce couldn't be anything but likable, lest they risk having Luce gain the audience's ire. But playing it this safe gives you nothing to work with narratively. It makes Luce unengaging as a character. Even if you don't hate her, Luce gives you nothing to look forward to story-wise. And like I said before, Luce is representative of a larger problem. Most other characters are written in a similar fashion. The priority to make the cast all likable, while admirable, is naive writing and proves Aaron Eha's right. Aaron Eha's, writer of Avatar and Dragon Prince fame, made a chart about what makes great characters. It has some false gods on one side, and the actual traits of great characters on the other. And what do you know? Crossed out and everything, likable is at the top of the list of false gods. Probably because of the problems I just brought up. I've been a wordy bitch, so I'll try to be clear. Unlikable does not automatically mean good. Unlikable characters are a breeding ground for conflict, absolutely. And conflict compels change, and thus story. But unlikability sure doesn't create investment. Generic bully Basha exists, and if I weren't making this video, I'd never learn her name. If in Steven Universe the Earth blew up or was enslaved by the Diamond Authority, I'd be more surprised than sad. And quick spoiler for Life is Strange, but the only correct choice at the end is to sacrifice Arcadia Bay. No, not to save Chloe, God no. But because everybody needs to go. They gotta go. If I could destroy Arcadia Bay and Chloe at the same time, I'd win a Nobel Peace Prize. So, were the Owl House writers stuck between a rock and a hard place? Could it still have interesting characters without giving up their charm? The baffling thing is, it already does. These four here should have been the model that all the characters should have strived for, because they're not just likable. They all have different ratios of likability to trash baby. That mix of endearing and garbage is what sets it apart from other shows. They're demonstrably good people, but still make mistakes. Ida and Amity are dorks that fuck up all the time, but they strive to be better. They're imperfect, multifaceted people on their own ongoing personal journeys, and that's great! Those two are fan favorites for good reason. Unfortunately, what story they do bring ain't perfect either.
But we can join the Emperor's Coven, like we dreamed about when we were girls.
Is this some sort of gay thing?
No.
You're sure?
Join me in the Emperor's Coven, Idolin.
The closest thing to an interesting, serialized story is the season-long mystery of Ida's curse. Who cursed her? Can she figure out the mystery before she runs out of time? Her sister Lilith asks her to join the evil Emperor's Coven so they can find a cure, but Ida refuses, saying that she'll find her own way to deal with the curse. Which is a lie. She never does anything the whole season about her curse that turns her into a mindless beast that could kill Luce and King in their sleep. There's so little progression that it's only up until the preseason finale when a frustrated Lilith just blurts out she's the one that cursed Ida. The answer had to be literally just given to her because of how little the show explored or cared enough about that plot point. And if the story doesn't care about the mystery of Ida's curse, if not even Ida herself cares, why should the audience? In terms of excitement, the engaging plot hooks that make you binge a series, the Owl House has none. There are no burning questions you're left with after an episode is said and done. The overarching story is so faint in every episode, it doesn't really leave much in the way of mystery for the audience. It ignores its two main plot threads, that Ida's cursed, and that she's allegedly being hunted down the entire first season. Hey Lilith, have you captured the Owl Lady? Nah. Oh, that's cool. I'll just vanish and never bother you about this until the season's almost done. Just do whatever. Us at the evil magic overlord Imperium are chill like that. J.J. Abrams has coined the term mystery box. Basically just breadcrumbing, leaving grand, tantalizing mysteries that you promise to pay off later. However, a lot of TV misuses it, because the creators also have no idea what the answers are to the questions they pose. This has left a sour taste in people's mouths when it comes to mystery boxes. However, it's obvious that the Owl House knows the answer to all of its questions, so why not make them actual mysteries? create a thread throughout the season that keeps people engaged. Wait, hold on! Oh my god, wait! I now realize why Ida never investigates her lifelong curse. The reason she doesn't spend a single episode solving the mystery of her curse. Think about it. Unlike Ida. Okay, Ida, let's figure out this curse business. I know it's been like decades since you've been cursed, so it might feel like a chore, but you know, maybe a fresh set of eyes can help shed some light. That's how Azura helped her mentor Mephisto-chan with her muscle curse. Your nerd references are weirdly apt, Luce, but sure, alright. At this point, kid, you deserve to know. Well, it all started during a witch's duel with my sister. A competition for the only open spot in the Emperor's Coven. And you know how much Lilith loves the Emperor's Coven. Yeah, this is all a real head-scratcher. I don't know where to start either. The audience was never given a single clue or fact about the time Ida was cursed, because literally anyone could figure this shit out. Even Phoenix Wright would crack this case instantly. The fact that Ida has been cursed for decades and never made the extremely obvious conclusion that her sister did it, retroactively makes her really, really dumb. And how dare you do that to my girl? Now, to fix this, instead of ignoring the mystery entirely, they could have at least tried to make it a puzzle, add a red herring, add more complexity to it. Maybe add an element of disbelief on Ida's part, make it a character thing. Like, Ida can't believe the sister she loves would do such a thing. That could be juicy stuff. But instead, we get nothing. On top of the mystery of Ida's curse being rock stupid, because they neglected discussing the curse the whole season, they had to rush all the information about Ida's curse all at the end. Thus, its origin had to be dirt simple, and stupid as well. As it is now, the entire reason the Owl Lady has her name, her myth, her legend, is because of a curse a teenage girl just found in a bin at a flea market. It wasn't some mysterious powerful figure, it wasn't Emperor Belos. This all-consuming curse was just one of many. In a bin. And Ida, who knows almost everything about the Boiling Isles, can't cure this shit? Why isn't there just a ton of people all cursed if mundane curses you can just buy off the street are so easily acquired and so impossible to reverse? Okay, the Owl House is more than a mystery, more than a story and cast. What else does it have? The Owl House is a comedy too? Yeah, that's clearly the tone. Just like the vast majority of other narrative-focused cartoons. Is it funny enough to lessen the feeling of disappointment you have in this serialized character and story-driven show? Clearly not. The comedy isn't why you're primarily invested in the show. The Owl House gave up a lot of dramatic potential and spent a majority of its runtime on just okay comedy. It's a waste. My disappointment with the storytelling met its apex at the finale. But before that, we have to talk about the preceding episode, Agony of a Witch. Now, up until Agony of a Witch, I was still fairly positive on the show, and my gripes with it were more like dull pains than proper stab wounds. I was still let down by the lack of proper serialization, but still had some amount of faith that they'd follow up on the plot hooks they'd mostly neglected. And I was right to believe, because that episode was stellar. There are some goofy things like, hey, it's a heist episode, but there's not even glass surrounding the objects Luce and friends are trying to steal. But the emotional payoff at the end? Like I said, stellar. Because I cared so much for these characters, Ida especially. Her sacrifice had an immense impact. The episode ends with Ida captured as a mindless, magicless beast. She's deep within the castle walls of the ominous Emperor Belos, clearly a master of magic himself. Luce, an inexperienced witch, returns to an empty home. For the first time ever, the Owl House was without its Owl Lady. It was a chillingly great moment. I couldn't wait for the next episode. I showed the episode to my friends. They couldn't wait until the next episode. They did an amazing job with Agony of a Witch, and we all theorized about where the show could go. This was like Avatar, we thought, and now that the safety net of Ida is gone, the next season would be a focused quest to save her, like Book 2 of Avatar was for Appa. Honestly, sorry Appa, but people are way more invested in Ida's fate than yours. The characters would be thrust into an unfamiliar situation, forced to adapt and grow against a seemingly unstoppable force. Man, second coming of Last Airbender. Maybe not quite as good, but man, there's so much great dramatic potential they've unlocked. The finale comes out. I'm awake before both my friends, well before either of them will be ready for our group stream. Like a kid taking a peek at his Christmas presents early, I fire up the episode by myself. Hype at its peak. Then, as the episode rolls on, my entire face inverts. Happiness and excitement soured into a confused grimace. And it was over. The episode, and my faith in the writers. Instead of an entire season, or even half a season, Ida is saved within a single episode of her capture. The writers really didn't want the Owl House without Ida in it. They couldn't bear for her to be gone for even a single episode. But how does Luce manage to save Ida? How does she rescue Ida from the deep depths of the castle of the most powerful witch on the Boiling Isles? Oh, the 14-year-old girl that lost at Magic Football just brute forces her way in. Yeah. She defeats the super tough shapeshifter from the first episode in 1 second, and all the armed guards protecting Ida's cell off screen. How is this possible? Isn't she an inexperienced witch who's never been in a real fight in her life? At least, not on her own? All of her previous conflicts are her essentially just running away and temporarily stunning her opponents. And the only thing she can really do for magic is create a pillar of an element that goes really fast in a single direction. That's the most powerful thing we've seen her do. And that's fine. It's great that she's inexperienced, and her usage of spells has a really limited application. Those restrictions would force creativity for Luce to cleverly use her spells, think around her limitations. But nah, not in the finale. Suddenly she's basically as good as Ida, and instead of a limited single use, she can just do whatever she wants with whatever element. Controlled ice spears, grasping vines, fucking magic beams? When did Luce learn how to do all of this? Why? Why does she need to be this suddenly competent at magic? How is she even doing all these different applications for magic? What's different from this time? What changed from the last time we saw her do magic, which was melt a small grate in the last episode? This is the equivalent to Aang being a master of all 4 elements without the avatar state at the end of season 1. There's no build up to this. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's build-up destruction. There are no rules anymore. They spent the entire season clearly telling the viewers that this is how Luce's powers work. Not only that, but they rewarded you for that by showing her steadily progressing and getting better at it episode after episode. You were watching her become a better witch, step by step. But they wanted Luce, or had to have Luce, look really cool for the finale, I guess. Had to have her look real badass. So they forgot all those rules, forgot all the progression that certain viewers focused on with rapt attention. There is no illusion that this is a fictional world of rules, because the writers have made it clear that at the last minute, if they run out of time to properly establish things, anything goes.
No transmutation circle.
So, after Luce deletes the rules on her powers and beats up everybody, Ida is saved, and I feel nothing. It was so easy, so nonsensical, so quick. And the emptiness somehow keeps getting emptier. She's not just saved from captivity, but from being trapped as a gross owl monster too. At least temporarily, thanks to a spell just introduced in the finale by Lilith. However, Ida is without magic now. And this is supposed to be a loss? So what? Ida can still do rune magic, and Luce has made it clear that you can become enough of a master with runes to hurt the ultimate witch off screen. There is no learning to be done, because Luce herself didn't do any. In fact, fucked consequences. Luce can defeat the entire Emperor's Coven in a second. It was easy. What can reasonably threaten her now? People can be saved from any dark fate within an episode, because the writers can't bear anything actually bad happening to their characters long term. It's magic, I ain't gotta explain shit. There are infinite alternatives that they could have done to this. You want Luce to be able to storm the castle? Fine. but do it without assassinating what little story buildup and coherency you have. The most obvious thing is, I don't know, ask her friends for help? You know, the characters that you spent the entire season establishing? Instead of Willow and Gus just starting an ineffectual chant, they could have helped to actively rescue Ida. Like, can you imagine Sokka and Katara just standing around watching Aang do everything? Can you imagine Aang consciously refusing their help? Why not bring back all the things you seeded throughout the season? For example, you could bring back the literal seed in episode 3. You know, the seed that Willow used to almost destroy an entire school before she was experienced with plant magic? What about Bat Queen, who owes Ida a favor? What about empowering runes that boost physical strength and spell power? What about the multi-magic detention kids? What about Amity's siblings? What about Amity? What about somehow animating the Owl House again with some sort of super hootie who has been shown to be able to take out the entire Emperor's Coven strike force by himself? What about the walking head of Dana Terrace? Okay, so maybe you don't want to do all the callbacks. Maybe just limit it to a manageable party. Where does that leave Luce then? How about instead of Luce being a complete master of elemental magic, she just uses her limited magic creatively? Have her do some good old prep time. Scope out guard routes, imprison them in a room of prepared ice pillars. Have some good spell combinations, heck, be a buffer and support her friends. Like we saw in Grom, your biggest hyped gay episode. All of these things are callbacks, things that have already been established as elements in this world. And it would have been awesome to call them back, to show that the relationships Luce made along the way were important, and to reward the viewer by telling them that all those seemingly unconnected episodes actually mattered, that they're all happening in the same world, and that Luce is paying attention, just like the audience. But that's not the case. You are not rewarded for paying attention, you are punished. None of the smaller stories that you spent an entire season exploring mattered to the plot. The show has no idea how to build up and pace anything, because Luce can just save Ida from the Emperor by her lonesome. After Agony of a Witch, the audience is told to despise Lilith, and then she gets redeemed within a single episode. You're not even letting the audience process their emotions, because by runtime, what, you want people to flip attitudes on her in the span of 10 minutes? The Albi's curse was revealed to be an incredibly obvious mystery and was bought at a flea market, probably next to Pogs and old Magic the Gathering cards. The Owl curse itself is greatly mitigated by a spell you learn about just a scant few minutes earlier. All of this happens in a single episode. The Owl House Season 1 finale crammed what could have been an entire season's worth of story into one episode, and every plot hook the show built up had a fumbled payoff because of it. The writers wanted to do everything with their story, but they spent the entire season with characters fucking around. And because they bungled and rushed all their story at the last minute, I retroactively hate every single lighter comedic episode that didn't serve any larger point to the story. So not only did they fuck up their serious story stuff with their bad structure and writing, but they took the comedic episodes down with them. You know, this has happened before. I'm reminded of a show that wasted all of its time on pointless comedic filler and completely neglected its story until the very last minute, Steven Universe. I said earlier that Steven Universe got 6 seasons in a movie, but I will now reiterate that they got that much in spite of the show's actual quality. And even though it had such fervent hype and clout at the time, the fall to Steven Universe affected its longevity. We're not even a year out from that show's conclusion, and no one talks about Steven Universe anymore, like it never even existed. It's because at the end of the day, story is king. Steven Universe got so far, not because of anything it lived up to, but because everyone thought it was going to live up to something. When everything was said and done, the destination wasn't worth it, and people were for the most part just putting up with the journey, so the journey wasn't worth it either. Steven Universe was content to just mill about with what is now, in retrospect, clearly pointless filler. Characters never asked questions or pursued mysteries until they ran out of time and the mystery solved itself. It ignored its pacing and story problems up until the very end. Steven Universe only got the attention it did because everyone felt it had such great potential. And potential's good if you like feeling potentially good. If you get 6 seasons in a movie and still don't fulfill any of it, then you can't tell a story worth a shit. And if you can't tell a story, then you're just wasting everyone's time. After the season 1 finale, I'm worried the Owl House is on the same track.
Oh, this is truly awful. Looking forward to the real draft.
The Owl House has shown its hand now. It shows it won't let its own story or established rules get in the way of the events it wants at the moment. It's not a character-driven show, because making Luce hyper-competent does not improve her character. It's not a story-driven show, because immediately saving Ida was far from the best thing for the story. It's a whim-driven show. The writers will just do whatever they want and not care about the ramifications to their story. You want cell phones and TV? Fine, but it's a retcon that destroys the magic of the world. You don't want Luce to be flawed? Fine, but then she has no growth. Do you want to litter the season with goofy episodes? Fine, but then you're neglecting your story and plot for a whole season and have to rush it in for the finale. Longtime viewers aren't rewarded for paying attention to story details because the writers aren't. The writers just do whatever they want. The established story doesn't matter. If the writers don't care about the story, why should we? Well, my dumbass stuck to the end for 2 reasons. 1, I didn't know they'd fumble the ball this badly. As for the other reason I stuck around, even though the Owl House writers proved how aiming for likable characters can ruin storytelling, they also showed why people try in the first place. I stand by what I said earlier in this video. The cast is likable. It's a cast full of good times. But all that meant was that there were a bunch of characters I cared about just sitting on the shelf. They weren't being used to their fullest potential. Characters are a vital part in any story, but they're not a substitute for narrative. While they certainly are what sticks with people the most, if nothing happens to them, well, they're just like really nice cars that never get driven, or a gaming PC that only runs benchmarks. They have so much potential, but without a good story, you just end up having all of this investment without having anywhere for it to go. And it's such a shame, because it could have an amazing story. There's a moment in the finale when Luce and Ida say they love each other.
I love you, Ida.
I love you too, kiddo.
I love you is just words. It's a platitude so overused to the point of meaninglessness. Growing up, I heard the words I love you so often, well before I even truly understood what love was. It didn't mean anything to me. It was just a nice thing to say, a dramatic thing to say. Sometimes, it was something you were forced to say.
I love you, son. You say it back.
I love you too.
This is nice.
I love you felt just as hollow when I'd see characters and stories say it too. But when Luce and Ida say it, it feels real, sincere. It's so powerful and actually touched me, because those are the characters of the Owl House. That's how much impact they have, how moving their relationships are. It's too bad they're wasted in this story. The original video I thought I was making wasn't nearly this biting. You'll notice the intro was way more on the side of, I wonder why this thing I love isn't catching on. The intro was written well before the finale aired, and before I even fully understood what I was watching. After taking a closer look, it's a rare show that makes me give a shit. But after watching the finale, I recognize the dark path it was on. If it isn't careful, and the creators don't acknowledge these faults, the show could end up like Steven Universe. People forgot about Steven Universe. I don't want people to forget about the Owl House. I want this rare show that can touch hearts to do so at its fullest potential it doesn't even realize it has. I want the Owl House to live on for years to be a classic. If it wants to earn its seat as one of the greats, all it has to do is have a good story, because they've got a cast you can care about, but they're waiting for a story worthy of them. Well, hopefully things really shape up in Season 2, and it might. Dana Terrace did an AMA on Reddit, revealing some behind-the-scenes insights on the creation of Season 1.
The original pitch for Owl House was darker, yes. I prefer stories for older audiences where things like whimsy and darkness can coexist. I mean hell, look at my personal artwork. Owl House is as kid-friendly as I'll ever be. Season 1 there was a lot of back and forth and compromise to work with what the studio wanted, and I'm very proud of what we accomplished in these first 19 episodes. That being said, I think Season 2 hits that intended tone a little closer. Excited to share it someday. BTW, you have 6 unheard messages.
One of the big takeaways for me is Dana bringing up production issues. The faults of the L House don't scream pure ineptitude, but inexperience at the storytelling level. Shows are giant productions with so many moving parts, a lot of people picking and prodding at it during the creation process. This is Dana's first time showrunning, so I can definitely see the first season of the L House having a lot of growing pains. Not everything can be perfect right off the bat. The bad story decisions could be a result of said logistical problems, of compromises between many parties. Like, they probably scrapped Luce's journey learning spells, and maybe most story stuff about Ida's curse was cut too. But those are just theoretical excuses. They don't excuse the end product we got. But this, and another thing Dana said, gives me some hope for Season 2. The crew of most other shows are obligated to purely praise their own shows regardless of their quality. But Dana acknowledged that Season 1 had a lot of compromises, and Dana stated that Season 2 hits her intended tone at least a little closer. That's not quite convincing, but it's promising. I don't know how you undo the severe damage to the world building and restore faith back into the writing team's abilities, but hey, anything's possible. Really, I'd rather I look like a fool for complaining so much and have Season 2 be great. I'd prefer that. I would prefer to love this show, as opposed to have all these mixed feelings about it. But after this video, all I can do now is stare longingly at pictures of Ida, so if you'll excuse me,